Is the timing, like, am I giving
No, you're
too
perfect.
much, too little?
No.
Perfect.
I was gonna say, the more information really that we get,
Yeah.
the better, because we can cut out as much as we want, but
Sure.
we can't add in.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to talk, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
You ready?
Yep.
Employment. This is a fun one for me. As soon as I realized I was trans, I decided to move away from Toronto to St. John's, Newfoundland, which is, some people thought that was a bit strange, but it was what it was. I found a great job, and I needed more money because I knew that there were going to be other issues with transition. So things are great. That's a great job, provincial government. My work was loved and respected. I was told it was a safe and secure job. So I decided it was time to pursue the transition, and I did. And lo and behold, it didn't take long before the job duties changed, and all of a sudden the safe and secure position, which was all but officially promised, was eliminated. And I found myself out of work. I found myself looking for work. Prior to coming out publicly as a trans woman, I'd never had trouble finding work. Got a university degree, got a college diploma, got 8 years of government work experience. Got any job I wanted, pretty much. Never had trouble with job interviews. But guess what? Now things changed. Good candidate, but you're runner-up. No, we don't think you have what it takes. Yeah, you won the competition, but we had to cancel it for some reason. Sorry. On and on and on. But we're still looking for that job at that level. I've been employed in roles that pay about half as much and seem to not respect my professional credentials. Now, apparently, I'm only good enough to do clerical and admin things. So yeah, I think it really is a social issue because no one's blatantly come right out and say we're discriminating against you. At least you can't do that. I guess it's politically incorrect to publicly discriminate against a trans person, but from a moral standpoint, there's ways to beat around the bush, and I'm sure that's what's going on here. And there's still a lot of work to be done. Most trans people I know in Newfoundland are underemployed or unemployed and cite this as a major problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is what it is. Moving on.
Yeah.
Law. Human Rights Act, records and documents. Wow, where to start? Can we give trans people human rights, or will this be a problem? The word human, I think, is the key here. We all are human. And also from a legal perspective, we do have something known as the Criminal Code of Canada. And it seems to be a major debate in these discussions about giving trans people rights. That somehow the criminal code will change and it will now be legal to sexually assault people in bathrooms. And that is totally not the case. Human rights, gender identity, gender expression. What do these terms mean? Do we need to define them? Does it matter? Well, one by one, we're seeing provinces at the provincial level add these terms to their human rights acts. And you know what? For the social aspect, society seems fine with it. There seems to be very limited outcry. A little more challenging, I guess, at the federal level. Not quite sure why, but the pendulum is swinging in the right direction. First things first, document that we are, I guess, a distinguished, recognized minority group, and putting our names as trans individuals in legal documents notates that we exist and notates that there's some challenges out there. Human rights is just the first step, though. Then comes the rest of the story. You got ID documents is kind of a huge topic right now. Medical, we can talk about that. Is trans a medical issue? I believe it is. And yes, I understand in the medical world you have two words, diagnosis and treatment. We also live in a cis-normative world, a very binary world that sees sex and gender as only two ways. And apparently you are what you were born with, if you ask the government officials. And I think it's critically important that ID documents be made available to people living. You cannot live life if you don't have ID documents. You can't get on an airplane, you can't get a driver's license, you can't get into a school like MUN. Does it even matter, really, what sex? Is it sex or gender? I like to say sex is between your legs and gender is between your ears. And if I'm qualified to drive, does it really matter? Either I've passed the driving test or I haven't. Ultimately, it's a privacy issue as well, and trans people are often finding their privacy outed unnecessarily because they have to present ID documents. Some of us need the surgery, some of us don't. Ultimately, we should all have the option to have names and ID documents that match who we are, so that our safety and privacy can be respected. Newfoundland currently does not allow trans people to change their ID documents unless they've undergone a complete, full biological surgical process. And that is not only a human rights issue, there's other obstacles to making that happen. That's legal. I guess I'll touch one more thing, the moral aspect, societal aspect of the legal records. Most people don't read legislations. I was born and raised in a political family. Mommy was a civil servant, Daddy was a politician. So you give me an 87-page document of legislation, I'm going to love reading that. Most people don't know what's in these documents. They don't know legalese. They don't even care. Ultimately, I think society is accepting of trans people. There may be a few myths out there that need to be addressed, but ultimately we can have these discussions and move on, and ultimately make sure people get the ID documents. I'll throw in one particular personal aspect where an ID document came back to give me some hardship. Trans people tend to have trouble at border crossings, specifically airports. And it's in the eye of the beholder. We don't wear buttons or stickers or shirts that say my gender identity is this or that. We walk up to a customs booth. Immediately they're going to look at us and make perceptions based on what they see and what they see on our ID. And I presented ID. Ironically, I had just had surgeries, but I did not have my new IDs. So I don't know if they had some sort of body scanner. They seemed to be under the impression that the biology didn't match the documents. And it was as if I was a criminal trying to illegally sneak into the country. I was pulled aside, I was fingerprinted, I was interrogated. I sat for 2 hours while they did some sort of a background check, missed my flight. And they said, okay, you're safe to go. But not before they asked me all sorts of personal questions about my transition and my health care, stuff that really had nothing to do with my safety to travel. Signature. I'm old school. You want to prove somebody is who they say they are? You sign the autograph. You used to go to the bank and you'd sign a signature. If the signature matched the one you had on file, that was a way to prove this is who they say they are. I was not asked to sign anything. Why not get back to some of these old school methods will work, people. Should we move on to healthcare?
Sure.
Healthcare. We have something known as the Canada Health Act, which allegedly dictates how provinces need to carry on their business, or at least the scope of which they do so. There are 5 principles, which I cannot remember. Universality, no cost. Transferability, there's 3 out of 5. Anyway, is there any enforcement? There's not. Our healthcare document, our policies here in Newfoundland for trans people are way out of date. They go back to the times when trans people were considered mentally ill, who needed to be shipped off to institutions for psychiatric assessments, sickening experiments that treated us like monkeys and sex toys. So I went and met with the people at the Department of Health and said, I think it's time to amend your policies and do what the rest of the world is doing. And they said, no, we can't do that, at least not right now. Whether it was a social issue or a logistical issue or a political issue, not totally sure, led me to file a human rights complaint. And guess what? The Human Rights Commission said, we cannot help you, Jennifer. Our scope is limited to individual discrimination, and we don't look at societal or systemic discrimination. I'm like, okay, so what good do you have to offer society? And that led me to look around Canada and take note that Ontario has a Human Rights Commission that has a much greater scope. They have the teeth. They can stick their nose into business that looks fishy, whether it's a blatant violation or not, and they can stick their nose into systemic issues. So if I could Maybe that could be a magic wand possibility. Let's give our Human Rights Commission the teeth it needs to do the job that is both legally and morally expected of them. So I ended up spending a lot of my own money on healthcare. I was fortunate enough that I had saved up enough money over the years. I had enough education that even with facing employment discrimination, I could still hold down a job that would allow me to pay my rent, buy my food, and spend $75,000 on healthcare, which included 2 trips to the United States to see doctors because the doctors in Canada either didn't know what they were doing or they're too hard to find. Hormones is, I guess, something you hear a lot in the trans community. Not all trans people want or need. The want versus need, that's a whole other can of worms. Unfortunately, we haven't quite reached the stage where we can do a blood test and say, yes, you're trans, or no, you're not. Ultimately, only the individual themselves knows where they fit in the trans spectrum and what steps need to be taken to rectify this dysphoric imbalance. That's difficult for doctors who are so used to having the power. And for me, it was walking into a doctor's office saying, hi, I need you to listen to me so you can help me. I've got a 200-page document from Vancouver Coastal Health that will tell you everything you need to know. You can phone them if you need advice. And a lot of doctors were like, no, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I just spent 9 years learning how to be a doctor. I don't want to have to go to school again. It's a lot easier to pass the buck, and that's what our policies here say. You're trans, go to Toronto. There's a clinic there that'll help you. Well, Toronto's a long way away, and guess who pays for the plane tickets? It comes out of your own pocket. You can apply for funding, for some funding. You may not get it. So ultimately I had to arm twist several doctors till I found one's willing to work with me, but it's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. Let me try that one again. It's not rocket science. Hormones, estrogen, testosterone. It's not just trans people that look at this little secret. All humans have hormones. Yes, they do. Except when you reach menopause and you don't produce them anymore. Any family doctor can prescribe hormones, whether you're a trans person or not. It doesn't really matter. Unless you have additional health reasons that would complicate things. So. Good news is we have a lot of family doctors here in Newfoundland prescribing hormones. Sadly, our neighbors in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, not so much. Their family doctors, for the most part, say, no, I want to send you to an endocrinologist, where you can wait 18 months to get in the door and see them. No need. Surgery. Do you need experts in Toronto to determine who needs surgery? No. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health has a protocol. It says any psychiatrist and family doctor can form a team and make these decisions. So unlike the policies we have here in Newfoundland, I said, no, I'm not going to the CAMH Institute in Toronto. I do not need to be treated like a monkey or a guinea pig. I've got doctors here that have been working with me for 8 years. They recommended surgery. I paid for it out of my own pocket. Guess what? It has not proven to be a bad decision. Proof that our Newfoundland doctors and our healthcare system can do this. From a societal systemic issue, there's a myth, both in and out of Canada, that we have great healthcare here. It's amazing how many people look at me funny when they learn that I had to pay for most of my own healthcare out of my own pockets. I thought this was Canada. I thought we have healthcare here. Not so. Not if you're trans. How do we get these things changed? Little old me can only bitch and complain so much. Then I get labeled a bitcher and a complainer, which leads to more discrimination. Don't hire McCreath. It's going to take a huge effort from, we need every trans person to stand up and be counted. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be as public as perhaps me, who goes on television all the time and talks about trans issues. But write a letter to the Ministry of Health, say I exist, I need trans care, and I want to see the policies amended. Our allies around us, I think, are all in agreement that trans people. Proof is in the pudding. There's a myth that trans people are mentally ill. Not true, but being trans, going through the challenges in society opens the door, makes us susceptible. Same mental illnesses that many people suffer: stress, anxiety, depression, suicidal tendencies. Sure, it's all there. You get the world treating you like crap, these things are going to hit you. And a lot of trans people, myself included, I've been through it all: the antidepressants, the sleeping pills, the counseling sessions. But you know what? That doesn't in itself make me mentally ill. And mental illness is a whole bigger topic, and I'm excited that there was a recent project launched by Amelia Curran, a well-known musician here in Newfoundland, who was trying to raise awareness and stigma about mental illness, and was quite happy to have me involved as a trans person. Trans people are people. Facilities?
Sure. I just want to. We have you until 5:30 booked, so you
Okay.
have 14 more minutes. I don't want to
Okay.
cut you short
Yeah,
or anything,
okay, we're getting
but
there.
I just don't want you to get interrupted by anybody else either.
Okay, perfect.
About 10 minutes too. I can like go outside and just wait for.
Yeah, that might be a good
Oh,
idea.
okay.
Yeah.
Facilities meaning public facilities? Is that the goal here?
I was gonna say I don't even know what they might mean by that.
I don't
Does
know
like
if-
washroom
I
facilities?
can talk about the,
Facilities,
yeah,
or-
I guess just accessibility to.
accessibility,
Gendered things.
yeah. I use the word cisnormativity, meaning, cis meaning not trans. Binary is a term that I use a lot, meaning you're either supposedly man or woman, or you're male or female. For the trans people, especially those in the midst of a transition, this is not appropriate or suitable. Facilities, we still see sex or gender segregated spaces. It's not always clear why we do this. Washrooms. I actually was educated. They used to call them bathrooms because you literally would have baths. Now there's a difference between a change room and a bathroom, especially when you have private stalls. Does it really matter? When you go in a private stall, do your business, what your ID says, what your biology is? I don't think so. Gender neutral is a term we're starting to hear, and I think it's great. We need to explore that, especially in light of the trans spectrum really coming to life. It's not so much a binary transition as it is a spectrum now. And 7 years ago, I almost had to oversell my femininity to convince the doctors that this is what I need to do. But now we can all be ourselves. We can fall anywhere in between the masculine feminine range. Education. We talking about access to education or societal education?
I would assume, I'm not the one who created the list, it was another one of our groups, but I would assume they mean like kind of just the broad spectrum, like your
Yeah.
access to education, but also maybe even trans education, like how
Sure,
much,
yeah.
like would you guys say, like how much you
Yeah.
think, like,
I can give you a bit of everything.
yeah, whatever you want to tell us.
I'm gonna wait outside in case.
Yes, just in
Yeah.
case.
First and foremost, education is important to gaining acceptance and understanding in anything. And I went through education systems partially in Nova Scotia, partially in Ontario, partially in Alberta. It didn't matter what course I took, I never learned anything about what trans people are or what it meant. And that's a major problem. We need to educate people on trans issues. Education for me, myself, I didn't even know I was trans till I finished university, so I can't really comment on challenges faced as a trans person negotiating the education system, but ultimately, whether you're in a school or anywhere, chances are if you're trans, you're going to be outed. You can't hide this from the world, especially if you're going through a real-life test. The world's going to know you're trans, and there's going to be a microscope on you, and it's not easy living your life like that. I've kind of adapted and embraced the spokesperson role, and I do a lot of educating society. Not every trans person wants to have these conversations with everyone, and it's important that the education system step up to the plate. And I think specifically they need to invite trans people into classrooms. I'm aware that they're inviting gay people in to do lectures and things like that. That's not the same. It's a slightly different issue. We need trans people educating society. Violence. There's a topic that hits a lot of trans people. Luckily, it has not hit me. Perhaps because I'm big and intimidating. People who want to pick a fight with me. Romance is a place where violence can often occur, especially when trans people are not always out at first to partners or dates. And that's a whole other conversation. How and when do you tell a partner of your trans status? can often lead to violence due to uncomfortable feelings. So it's definitely an issue that needs to be discussed. Self-worth, I think quite highly of myself. A lot of trans people get rejected a lot, as I have, and they start to wonder, what's it going to take? I live my life not caring what people think. Now all of a sudden I have to, if I want to find a job, if I want to find a place to live, if I want to walk up and down the street safe. Self-worth is so critical, and I think ultimately for a trans person that's going through the journey and can document successful milestones, you can see this is a tough project to undertake. And every time I walk out that door, I see a success story. Definitely self-worth is an issue that affects many members of the trans community. Let's talk family. Supposedly a happy, healthy man who's lived a great life for 33 years all of a sudden tells all their family, guess what, I'm a trans woman, I'm going to go through this transition. Shock, I think, was the biggest factor. Disbelief, perhaps some guilt. Did we do something wrong as parents? Oh my God, what the hell's wrong with you? The reactions were all over the map, and I had to make it quite clear to them, this is, you can't stop this, this has to happen, and it will happen. You can come on board for the ride, or you can be left in the wake. I think every trans person will be able to tell a story of some family members that have turned their back on them. No different with me. Rural versus urban. Interesting. I think of St. John's as a big city. In 2007, I put my hand up at a Eddie Pride event. Someone had a question about trans issues, and nobody in this room knew what the heck a trans person was. Very quickly, I learned I was perhaps in a smaller town than I thought. I spent a lot of time traveling East Coast Canada, visiting even smaller towns. It's easier to blend in when there's many trans people. And, oh yeah, I know a trans person, on and on, they want to tell you the whole story. When you're the only one, again, there's extra judgment, there's a microscope, there's a spotlight on you. And small town, everybody knows everybody, and everybody gossips. And it's tough being, I guess, a celebrity for all, not necessarily good reasons. And that's, I guess, the question. How do we make this a good thing? I'm Jennifer McCreath, I'm a trans woman, but I'm also a marathon runner. I've been involved in politics, I've done a lot of good things. I want the trans label to add value to my life, not hurt it. Getting out into the rural towns is so important. If there's one trans person there, they need to see that there are other trans people that they can reach out to. So yeah, trans people, if you're watching this, get in touch, let's go on tour. Parenting. Well, here's another, tied in with healthcare. And the moral aspect, are we all allowed to have kids, or should you have to pay for this? If you're transitioning, you take the hormones, you have the surgeries, you're going to lose your reproductive parts fairly quickly. I decided that I might want to be a parent in the future, a biological parent, so again, I whipped out my credit card and spent a lot of my own money and stored sperm safely in a freezer in a private clinic. So if and when the time comes that I want to turn those sperm into babies, we can pursue that. A lot of trans people don't have that option. I can't speak as a parent raising trans kids, but I can definitely see the struggles my parents went through when I, at 34, announced I was trans, them in their early 60s, coming to terms with something very new and different and scary. And parents ultimately worry about, I think, the safety of their kids. And that was first and foremost, is I want to make sure you're safe. And again, that comes back on society. Trans Day of Remembrance coming up. We're going to commemorate murder victims from trans hate. We ought to be safe. Age. Do you know what that's good in there for?
I'd assume they just mean like how you feel your situation as a trans woman differs from maybe like a trans woman who was a teenager or older, like you were saying. And you don't have to touch on all of them if you don't want to.
I will say, let's talk about age. I am 40, and I didn't even know I was trans till I was 34. I think I'm a product of the 1970s and 80s education system. Times have changed. The word's spreading around, and trans people are discovering themselves a lot sooner in life, and that's great. A lot of efforts are being paid, a lot of attentions are being paid to the trans youth out there. But let's not forget, there are older people going through this trans puberty. I'm 40 going on 14, and it's just as scary, if not perhaps more so. Try negotiating the business world, going through a transition. Transition can happen at any age. I've met seniors in their 70s just realize they're trans and go through this process. Culture, I think I look at mainstream entertainment, and I think we're finally starting to see trans people portrayed either in fiction, and we're starting to see positive stories about trans people in the news. Still, I think we got a long way to go. There's definitely a lot of myths and confusion between the gay community and the trans community, specifically the drag queen community and the trans community, who are very different. It's great that we're starting to see trans people portrayed. It's usually not trans actors playing these roles, so that's the next step. I think we're definitely starting to see a shift in that right direction, to be inclusive. Local story, we have a show here called Republic of Doyle, 6 years. One reference to a trans character out of all the episodes, and this individual was, I believe, a drug dealer or a prostitute, so I was a little disappointed. No, not all trans people are drug dealers. We're not all prostitutes. We're not all criminals. We don't all have sexually transmitted diseases. Most of us are just plain old boring regular people trying to live their life. Ethnicity. Amazing. I go from the so-called privileged, rich, upper-class white male, and now I'm a trans woman. I think that's tough enough. You're below on the scale of acceptance than any non-trans person. But I see a lot of, especially Black American trans people, saying it's even tougher for us. You look at the Trans Day of Remembrance ceremonies, it's usually the ethnic ones that are getting murdered. Countries like Brazil are a lot worse. So, yeah, we're all people. Skin color doesn't matter. Trans people are trans people. People are people. Internal conflict within the trans community. I think that's a critical issue. It's very tough to fight for rights when you don't have a common voice. And part of that conflict, I think, is this acronym LGBT, sexual orientation versus gender identity. They are not the same thing. Everybody has a gender identity, whether you're trans or not. Everyone has a sexual orientation, whether you're trans or not. Transitioning isn't about who you're attracted to. It's not about getting a marriage document. It's not about donating blood. It's about being able to live your life in the identity in which you are. And sure, there's a lot of conflict. Should we need surgery or not? Can I be accepted regardless of what's between my legs versus I need what's between my legs changed? Should we work with the gay community or work beside them? There are all sorts of pros and cons. Can we agree on what the word transgender or transsexual means? Do we like the word tranny or not? Do we like the word queer or not? Again, different demographics come into play. The trans community is a microcosm of the world. We're not all alike. We're not always going to agree. And that makes it, I guess, additionally challenging. To all those so-called LGBT organizations that want to be trans-inclusive, I challenge you to look at your boards, look at your senior executives. Trans people are underrepresented in these groups in North America. A study was done in the States. Less than 1% of LGBT board of directors were trans. And if you really are trans-inclusive, you need to demonstrate that at a leadership level. Specific supports, bullying and mental health. I think we need, again, it goes back to my comment about being trans is not a mental illness in its own, and I don't think it should be separated or segregated. I know there's a lot of counselors that want to make a living helping trans people with their mental health. You need to treat us like any other people. I have depression not because I'm trans, but because I go through the same other reasons people get depressed. And the sooner all mental health doctors recognize this, the better. Bullying, I think it's an issue. Again, it comes with educating society. You need to teach people rights from wrong, treat everyone with equal respect, and that diversity doesn't necessarily mean deviance or a negative thing. And I think that would be about it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
How's that?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Hope I don't erase all this.
Yeah.
I don't know what I have to do.
I don't, so I'm gonna go.
Chelsea.
Jennifer McCreath, November 12, 2014. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you very much. That was great. I was afraid I don't want to press on the number.
You wanna press the wrong button?
I was like, I'm gonna